we have a very interesting talk now. Since we're already discussing there are different industries, there are multiple sectors that AI is working on. So we have another talk in which we'll talk about how AI is revolutionizing healthcare. I would like Mr. Farrukhkhan, the founder and CEO of Inference Analytics, to discuss the evolution of artificial intelligence and impact on healthcare delivery and saving lives. With over 25 years, Farrukh has vast experience and has held multiple leadership roles in product management, strategy, and general management in the analytics space. Farrukh, we're very happy to have you on board with us. The floor is yours now.
Thank you so much. Please let me know if you can see my screen. I am sharing.
Yes. We can see your screen. Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let me slow it. All right. So Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's very nice to be here talking to you. I'm based in Chicago and it's very early in the morning here. So I apologize if I'm not sounding as woken up as I should be. But in any case, it's an important topic. So it's a topic important enough that we should all wake up for it, and we should think about it at least, and we should try to solve it, right? So the bottom line here is, and I heard the last few pitches, and I'm very impressed by the work that's going on in Pakistan around how AI is being applied to healthcare. But before I actually get into this topic, the important point I guess I want to make here is that there's no question that AI is having an impact. And if it's not had an impact, it will have a bigger impact on healthcare and specifically on saving lives, right? So we come out of this, or we're trying to come out of this pandemic mode, which has affected everyone across the world, right? And we're all united, whether we're living in the US, Chicago, or Karachi, or Lahore, or Islamabad. Everyone has experienced this at a level which will probably be analyzed for years to come. And the only area that we feel that is going to perhaps differentiate and try to move us beyond and try to prevent something like this from happening, I believe, is the evolution of this technology called AI, right? Artificial intelligence. So that is the topic, right? And that is the topic I want to go over. And I'm not going to necessarily get specifically into any one use case and just focus on that, but I want to give it a bit of a broad brush and talk about it from that perspective. So as you know, you got a brief intro to me, and I don't want to go too much into it, but important to bring up a few points, right? So first, I run an AI company here based in the US, a deep tech company, which has built deep learning based technology to improve care delivery. Specifically, we're working with radiology, we're working with dental radiology, and we're sort of analyzing what people do in terms of both notes and reports, and then also images, right? And so we're in the midst of this, and we're working at in that level. So every day we're working with people who are trying to solve healthcare problems and who are trying to improve lives using AI. But the important point I wanted you to take away from my experience is that I've spent my entire career in the analytics space, right? And for the last 5 years, I actually have been focused on determining how AI can be impactful. And I'm not I'm not a healthcare person, right? So I did not come at it with a breadth and depth of sort of AI expertise in healthcare. I came at it from an analytics perspective, and I analyzed the market for a good 2 years. We experimented at Inference Analytics before we got into one area. And I concluded, this was well before the pandemic, that the area that required most help and the area that was most behind in terms of using advanced analytics, as I called it at the time, I wasn't even calling it AI, was healthcare. And healthcare has the most valuable, the most richest data sets, and the most untapped data sets, right? And so it's important that you take away from my experience that here's a guy who has spent time. I've helped build significant companies. So Informatica, MicroStrategy, these are hypergrowth companies. These are companies that became unicorns well before the term unicorn was created, right? And so it's important to understand that, right? These are experiences that allow someone to understand, okay, so what can you do now with analytics? And so with that, we created inference analytics. My last job was at IBM before I started this, and I ran IBM's big data team. So again, that was also giving me a big exposure to analytics and advanced analytics. I saw leaders across the world who were dealing with analytics, making analytics decisions. And so when I came into inference analytics, my focus was, okay, what can you do that is going to solve core problems that the world needs? And after looking at a bunch of areas, we concluded that healthcare was that space. And so let's get into why we came to that conclusion, right? And so before I dive deeper into it, and it's important to sort of level set with everyone, right? So what do we call as AI? And the term AI is overused because everyone will claim they're doing AI these days. If you're doing any technology that's software oriented or maybe even hardware oriented, there's a good chance you're going to call it some form of AI, artificial intelligence, right? And I'm not going to disagree with that because everyone has that right? Everyone has that right to be able to say that there is some level of automation in what they do. And there is some level of AI in what they do. But, this is sort of important to level set that AI, in terms could be looked at rules-based solutions, could also be considered AI, machine learning, which is not necessarily deep learning, where there are specific types of models, specific types of even regression models could be termed as AI, and then deep learning, which is, in my opinion, the crux of what AI should be labeled, right? That is at the center, right, of what people are referring to as AI, and a lot of the work that's going on, whether it's in convoluted neural networks, CNN models, or other types of models, that is what AI is. But fundamentally, to level set there, right, AI is the ability to make human-like decisions, for machines to make human-like decisions by understanding and generating language, by understanding images, right? And then coming up with cognitive conclusions that are similar to humans. And so that is what I believe AI does. And then the main advantage is, so why would you, if you're doing all of that, you're trying to replicate a human being, the question you would ask is, okay, so if I'm able to do all of that, I have a human who can do that too. Why do you need a machine to do it? Because you need a machine to do it because you need to do it at scale, right? And that scale is not necessarily available, right, to people without AI, because you only have so many human beings. You don't have that many human beings to go around. And I'll make that point specifically from a healthcare context, but it's important to make that distinction that yes, we're making human-like decisions, but then because we can do it at scale, we can do it for situations where human beings are not available. That creates the advantages, right? That creates the scale that you can solve problems that you could not solve if AI wasn't there. And so, but I want to draw your attention to the left side of this slide, right? So there is this whole concept of, what we used to call, before we used the term AI a lot, this sort of analytic continuum, and the analytic wheel, as I call it, right? There's this whole concept of descriptive analytics, dashboards and reports, and then you would use those to figure out what happened in the past, and you would try to predict behavior, right? In terms of, okay, what's going to happen next? And finally, the goal was to try to prescribe behavior, right? And prescription was, what should somebody do? Now that you know what happened in the past, now that you tried to predict what was going to happen tomorrow, okay, so what really should you do was this prescription aspect. And that was the most important part, because sometimes you can know the other two pieces, but if you don't know what you're going to do, it's not important, right? If I told you what your problems are, you'll say, great. And if I told you what's going to happen tomorrow, to say, okay, that's good, maybe it'll happen. But then unless I could tell you what you should do, this analytic process was not important. This is where AI comes in, right? And so it's important that we relate these sort of mental models, right? That there is an AI world that actually gets applicable in this context, and that AI world is what the prescription is possible, right? And prescription, not drug prescription, but what people have to do, what decisions they should make, it is derived from AI. So anyway, let's go ahead, right? So broadly speaking, and I want to make sure I stay close to time. Broadly speaking, there are two core areas of AI. One is diagnosis, and the other is drug development. And those are in healthcare, those are the two areas, and those are broad terms, but look at it that way, right? So in patient diagnosis, and I put this whole concept of how you can use AI to, or people try to use AI to try to diagnose COVID patients, right? And so that's an obvious one, because you can take a chest X-ray and you can put it through some kind of an AI trained model, a CNN model, right? That has seen a lot of chest X-rays, that you have labeled chest X-rays for people who had COVID, and then you can use that model to actually predict the next ones, right? And so that is patient diagnosis, broadly speaking. But it's not just there, right? The other side is drug development, right? And drug development is, how do you produce drugs faster, better? How do you roll them out faster? How do you make them more personalized, right? How do you provide drugs that are catering to specific conditions that people have, not broad drugs that here's a drug for heart disease, but actually here's a drug for heart disease for people with certain biomarkers, for people with certain genetic sort of underlyings, right? And so this is where AI becomes more and more important. And so as we're thinking about the importance of AI in saving lives, these are the two areas. And in patient diagnosis, the broad one and the one that people talk a lot about is interpretation of radiology. We're working in that as well. But it goes even deeper, right? And so there are whole areas of diagnosis which relate to text and which relate to notes, which relate to understanding lab values, where AI becomes very important. And so the question people ask, and this is an important topic, right? Especially in the US, because it's not common that AI models are still being used to actually do this work. Even though you've got a lot of companies that have been created, a lot of startups, we're one of them, right, that's working in this space, still AI is not truly being used to actually diagnose patients. And one of the reasons is there's a whole debate about whether an AI model is accurate enough, whether it's actually, and there are physicians who work in that space and they feel that an AI model's accuracy actually degrades over time. And there's a whole topic that's relevant and debate that goes on in the US about this. So there is still limitations in how sometimes AI is being allowed to do those diagnoses. But the point I want to make is there are about 5 million or so healthcare providers in the world. There is a lack or scarcity of about 4.2 million physicians and healthcare providers today. So if you go to WHO's website and type in, okay, how many people, how many healthcare workers are needed, right? Or the scarcity, you will get this number that about 4.2 million is that number, right? So 4.2 million scarcity. Now, how are you going to fill that gap? We're not going to fill it by physicians. And as high quality physicians that we'll find across the world, right? There will be people who will say, we can diagnose it as good, if not better, than what the AI model does. The point that you need to understand is that the scale is not there in the world right now. The scale is missing. And that's why when I defined what AI was, right, that, yeah, we are going to make interpretations and we're going to look at images and understand images and interpret images. And we're going to look at notes and be able to write notes and understand notes in a similar way to what a human being does. When you make that point about a machine, realize that the biggest point is that we're going to do it for situations where the scale is not there. And this is where the scale is not there, right? There's a lack of 4.2 million healthcare providers in the world today. And the only way to fill it will be through AI, right? And there's no doubt about that, right? You go in Africa, there'll be parts of the world where there are no doctors. And so if you can put AI models that can automatically look at lab values, that can automatically look at images, and that can interpret and then come up with diagnosis for those people, you will be saving lives. And I say that especially for example, in cancer, the biggest issue in cancer is early detection, right? So if you can actually early diagnose lung cancer, if you can take a lung nodule and you can diagnose it early enough, you're going to save that person's life. And how do you do that? You cannot rely on that person necessarily having access to a physician. You will have to use AI models to do that. So anyway, that's the one part on the diagnosis. On the drug development, it's a kind of, and I don't want to just focus on this aspect of clinical trial, but personalized medicine is an important part of the world, right? So as a medicine evolves, the ability to specifically tailor and target individual biomarkers, so you know who you are actually creating a drug for. You are actually going after people with not just certain conditions, but they may have certain comorbidities, they may have certain underlying conditions. That becomes what people call precision medicine. And actually, it is directly related to using data and AI to do that. So the issue, and we all experience this, right? The rollout of the drugs that we've seen, the Pfizer drug or the Moderna drug, or whatever drug, that you've used, there's a whole process to creating that drug. There's a whole process to rolling out that drug. And so all of that could be expedited using AI, right? So whether it's recruiting of clinical trial participants, because you need to know everything about a participant to make sure that the drug trial happens correctly. And you need to make sure that the drug trial, once it's done, it's properly analyzed, right? So these are areas that the AI becomes critical in. And then the other side of it is the reporting, right? So we are at a point where once you have done the trial, you need to make sure that you are able to understand every single thing that happened in that. And so in that trial, and how do you do that? You can't, again, depending on the scale of how many trials are going to be done, you need AI to be able to understand the results, understand the notes. And so this is an important use case, right? Because it can potentially save lives, because if you roll out a drug faster, if you roll out a drug more accurately, as in you are able to get all the underlying conditions or all the underlying experiences of the clinical trial participants to make sure that nothing is missed, it becomes very critical for saving lives. Now, the whole area of sort of, next phase of sort of evolution of AI, and this was sort of probably the most important, you could say, discovery or occurrence that has happened recently is Google Alphabet's DeepMind's innovation, right, in this whole area of area of AlphaFold, right, where AlphaFold is able to predict specific protein structures very accurately, right? And so once you are able to do these levels of prediction and understand protein folding, right, in such a way, you're able to actually create drugs much better, because you understand the underlying sort of genetic code, right, of the human, and also how that human and those biomarkers then interact with the drug that you're providing them. And then you are able to create better, more targeted results, right? And better results that actually don't cause, sort of bad outcomes. And so this is probably one of the most important innovations that has happened, and a direct result of artificial intelligence, right? And so this is still not obviously being used in the world today, because these are just discoveries that have just been done, but these are important innovations that have been caused as a result of AI that will allow the next level of innovation in terms of drug development. And then finally, and I know my topic was supposed to be 20 minutes, and I'll stay exactly on time. Understanding language is the essential innovation that has happened in the last 3 years, right? So people have talked about this term called natural language processing. We work very closely in that, right? So my company, my startup, deals with language interpretation and uses language to actually annotate images and do things along those lines. But the important point here is that understanding language is hard. It's probably harder than understanding image, right? Because image is more obvious. Language is subjective. You can say one thing in 20, 50, 30, 40 different ways. And to be able to understand that and then to be able to actually write that is hard. And so there's innovations that have happened in the last 3 years that have allowed us to be able to do that better, right? And so important to note that while we focus so much on image diagnosis and X-ray interpretation and MRI interpretation using AI, language interpretation, especially in healthcare, to be able to understand the vast amounts of notes about each patient is critical, because then you can actually tailor your therapy to people appropriately. You can know everything about them. And that is one of the big issues in the US, is they say, right, one of the biggest, one of the most mundane drudgery possible is going to be solved, right? Excessive paperwork and red tape is going to be solved by using AI. This was pre-pandemic, so it still holds true in some sense, that there is a lot of text and notes that have been written that nobody reads. And how do you read it? You actually use AI. And if you are able to read an underlying condition and find out about an underlying condition about a specific patient, you are able to prevent them from getting the wrong therapy and actually having a bad health outcome and potentially saving lives. So with that, 20 minutes are up for me. I appreciate you listening to me this morning. Feel free to reach out. You can also follow me on Twitter at @1KhanFarrukh. And I look forward to interacting with the innovations and all the wonderful work that's going on in Pakistan. With that, I'll stop my talk here. Thank you so much for